with the Swedish introduction in Swedish. And then I will go over to English. Are you ready?
Yes.
Hej och välkommen till Kornhall Netz. Det här är en skolpodd som vi gör i samarbete med tankesmedjan Arena Idé. Och vi, det är ju jag, Per Kornhall, som är någon sorts oberoende expert och författare och också ordförande för läromedelsförfattarna. Och så är det ju Ingela Netz. Vad gör du, Ingela?
Jag jobbar enkelt uttryckt med väldigt många perspektiv på skola och skolutveckling. Både som deltidsanställd i Nykvarns kommun på utbildningsförvaltningen, men också i egna uppdrag. Massa olika saker. Bland annat Spiral of Inquiry som jag har pratat om i ett antal, eller vid några tillfällen tidigare.
Och vi gör ju det här för att vi tycker det är så spännande med skola och utbildning, och inte minst spännande att träffa och få samtala med människor som är engagerade i det här. För att utbildning och skola är någonting som skapar enormt engagemang. Och med oss idag har vi en människa just med ett väldigt, väldigt stort engagemang för skolan, och inte en person som är känd för dem som rör sig i skolans värld och läser om utbildning och så. Men för de som inte vet precis vem man är, så är det en professor som är bördig från Finland men är bosatt i Australien. Om jag läser hans CV så är det Världsbanken, det är utbildningsdepartementet i Finland, han har jobbat på Harvard University, han har fått en massa fina priser. Mest känd eller inte mest känd, men han har också skrivit ett antal böcker, och några av dem har ju sålts i väldigt, väldigt stora upplagor, vet jag. Och den ena boken är den som heter Finnish Lessons. What can the world learn from educational change in Finland? Som nu är uppe, tror jag, i version 3. Man har också skrivit om vikten av lek, en bok som jag är spänd på att läsa, som jag inte har läst, men det är den sista boken, är In Teachers We Trust, The Finnish Way to World Class Schools, som jag tror skulle kunna vara spännande i en svensk kontext. Nog om detta. Nu är han bosatt i New South Wales i Sydney, och vi välkomnar Pasi ska jag säga uttala det på riktigt sätt, Pasi Sahlberg. Välkommen, Pasi, and we'll now switch to English.
Okej, tack så mycket, Per.
It's a long list, but I have to ask you another thing. Do you like Lego?
I have learned to love Lego. Yes, I do, and Lego is actually a big part of my family. I live here in Sydney with my wife, and we have 2 little boys, and they're crazy about Lego. And I grew up with Lego as well. So why do you ask?
Because I saw something when you presented the book In Teachers We Trust. There was a lot of Lego models behind you. I watched the video on YouTube. Yeah, so I thought.
Yeah. And I was, my love in Lego actually got deeper in 2016 when the Lego Foundation gave me the annual Lego Prize. That is a really it's a distinct honor to get. People like Ken Robinson received it before me, and some others. So my answer to your question is yes, I do love Lego.
I have to ask about Sydney. How come you ended up in Australia? We know you've been traveling the world for many years, but why Australia? And
my answer to your question, if you ask almost any location, whether it's the World Bank or Harvard University or here, it's just a coincidence. I never applied. I never thought of coming here, but it's just so happened that about 10 years ago, there was a Minister of Education here in New South Wales. Australia has different states and territories, and they're almost like countries. For me, Australia is like a Nordic, like a Scandinavia, but they're different countries and states. So this minister here called me just out of the blue. I was in Helsinki, and he asked my advice, which is a kind of a rare thing to receive a phone call directly from minister. Normally you get it from the advisor or the office or something, but this minister called me. I didn't know him, and he asked me a couple of questions in the middle of my kind of a daily walk in Helsinki, and then he asked me that when are you coming to Australia next time? And I said, actually, I'm going to be there in about, let's say 4 months. And that's where this relationship started. And so I was working with this minister a little bit, being his critical friend. And then about 4 years ago, he left the politics altogether, which is a kind of a rare thing for any politician or minister to do. So he stepped down as a minister and then left the parliament. He had been a member of the parliament for 20 years and went to the university. And that's how it started. So he called me again and said, I have a job for you. I said, Australia is too far away. And, you know, I have my family and everything is good. You know, we live in the happiest country in the world here in Finland and so on. But then he could convince me that, you know, come and at least see what they're doing. And it was so kind of an interesting opportunity to work very closely with him. And, you know, if you have a chance to work with the very much respected and trusted Minister of Education, it means that all the doors are open for you. So he spoke about this, that what we can do and come here. And, you know, New South Wales is a little bit like Sweden, the same type of thing that everybody knows that, you know, the system has this kind of a serious inequality issue within it. And many people know about it, but nobody really knows what to do, or if they know what to do, they don't want to do anything. So he asked me to come and help him to do a little bit work. So that's how I came here three and a half years ago. And it was a completely unplanned move, but it's been a pleasant, interesting one, particularly now because of this pandemic and everything, and how Australia has been handling this very differently to Sweden or Finland or many other countries. And so, but here we are locked down, and borders have been closed for most of the past 2 years. So,
and the schools have been in total lockdown for a very long time in Australia, right?
No, you know, it's an interesting thing because Australia, we have 6 states and 2 territories here, and they have independent governors, and they have their own school systems. They're actually interestingly different from one another. So I think you refer to Victoria, where there has been the schools where, like last year, most of the school year, I think they were closed 115 days or something like this. But here in New South Wales, we don't have really had much school closures. If you go to places like Northern Territory or western part of Australia, now Western Australia calls themselves Western Korea, because it's like they don't want to be called North Korea, but it's like completely sealed, and their schools have been open all the time. So it really depends on where you are in Australia, what type of experience you have had with this during these past 2 years.
Have you had, like you were called by this minister to do something, and then you now followed him to the university. Have you had any impact? I mean, can you see that your work together has led to changes, positive changes? I mean, this is just a curious question. When you have that chance, that kind of possibility, does it work?
Yeah, it's a good question, Pat. And of course, to get an honest view to that, you need to ask that from somebody else. But when I came here, we both put the bar very high. So we kind of wanted to change the system. We wanted to have not just a little cosmetic change, but like a real change, so that people would understand that if we want to be the world-class leading education system that Australia was 20 years ago, everybody was looking at this country, that we need to do much more than just the little makeup things here and there. If I answer your question from that point of view, I think that we have not been able to change much. But then if I look at the school level or individual level changes, I hear almost every day I received an email or Twitter comment or something from a school that have been, part of the work that we have been doing on equity in education, meaning that, trying to help people to make sure that the school system and schools would be serving each and every child in the same ways. And more recently, my work on play here, that I see, the play thing that is a very much kind of a Nordic, Swedish, Finnish, Danish idea, has been gradually shifting away from the schools. And my arrival here 3.5 years ago kind of turned that a little bit towards what it should be here, that the schools would be places for play and learning through play as well. I think I have been able to make some school level and certainly individual level impacts on that thing. But changing education systems, as you both know, in Sweden or anywhere, is a difficult and complicated and kind of a time-consuming activity. Maybe the history one day will show that, you know, this little work that we started to do here and we continue to do somehow led to the system's change, but I still remain a little bit pessimistic about that.
Let's talk some more about the focus on equity, because I read an article from last year, I think it was, where you together with a colleague try to point out some principles that are needed to achieve real equity. And the first question might be, what is real equity in school?
Yeah, that's the whole point. That's why we started to work on three or 4 years ago, having these conversations that what is equity. As you can see in many other OECD countries, but particularly here and in the English-speaking world, it's so easy to say that, you know, what we try to do, we want to have an education system that I would just like to say to the Swedish listeners that likvärdighet, equity and likvärdighet is the same thing. So sorry, just they can grab it. Yeah. So the what I was saying was that the excellence and equity is so easy. They're almost like a kind of a fashionable, sexy terms to be used. But if you scratch a little bit the surface of how people understand what they mean by those things, it's very easy to realize that, you know, excellence is high test scores or PISA scores or whatever metric you have, but equity is much harder to explain. So that's why, you know, we started to work on a little bit on this paper that is looking at equity. We call it equity and adequacy in education, because we think that in this equity concept, if you think about it as a kind of a system level thing, there should be at least two different dimensions. The other one is the social equity. That means that if we look at students in different equity groups or socioeconomic groups, that their performance should be similar to the educational performance in any other socioeconomic group. So that's what we mean by social equity. But then what is happening now, that if we only use that metric, it's doesn't include this idea of having adequate education. That means that everybody, every child, every young person should have an education that is meaningful for them. And you know, if you look at the Swedish system, or probably the Swedish system is a little bit better off than the education system here, for example. This adequacy is often kind of a missing here, that everybody is expected to have the same type of education, and it's almost always the academic education. So that you study until you're 18, the same type of academic stuff, regardless of what your interests or needs or passions are. And that's why we think that in this equity concept, this adequate education is equally important than this social equity. And only when we get these two dimensions in place simultaneously, then we can talk about a little bit different concept of equity in education. I think these measurements that are often used to compare countries and their levels of equity is undermining this adequate education side. So you may say that a country X has an equitable education system without looking at what type of education these young people are having. They may have education that has no relevance for them whatsoever. They have good test scores and examination results, but they don't do anything with this education. That's what we mean by the adequate education. It's a long debate in education sociology and history, and we just try to bring these conversations a little bit closer to one another.
And of course it will get very, very complicated when you look into those dimensions, how you could measure them and how you could evaluate them, of course.
Absolutely.
But talking about equity, of course we want in this talk about, I mean, the differences between Finland and Sweden. That's of course and one of the things, and one of the countries that stands out in some of the equity measures, I mean, between school variation is Finland, of course, which is, I mean, there is a huge difference between Sweden and all other countries. And Sweden, as you know, has been the level of the differences between classrooms have been rising dramatically in Sweden for at least the last 20 years. Maybe it started for 30 years ago, but at last it last 20 years. But you said something about, so we, of course, you want to discuss a little bit of the differences between the Swedish and the Finnish school system, but you said something that Finland was the happiest country in the world. And I know those results. What is the connection between the school system and happiness, as you look upon the Finnish society?
Yeah, it's again great question to think about. But for example, here, and I understand this kind of a Nordic values and precious things that we have much better through living overseas. I spent almost 10 years living in the United States, and now it's been 3 or 4 years here. And these both countries are very, very different compared to Sweden or Finland or any other country. And mostly in the sense that, many of these basic public services, something that are important for families and individuals, like health, pension system, holidays, social life and education, are so much different here. Like here, for example, if you're a parent, a normal Australian parent living in Sydney or Melbourne or practically anywhere else, one of the biggest concerns in your life is education, your children's education. And so it's the same thing in the United States and many parts of the UK, that if you have a family that you are so kind of occupied by these concerns about where do I find a good school, and do I have enough money to pay my children's private education, or can we afford a tutoring or summer camps or these things. And I think if you think about almost any family or situation in the Nordic countries, we don't need to worry about those things. And I often say, people often ask me the same thing that you ask me, Per, that how are these things, happiness and education, connected? And I say that back home, when I had my family in Finland, we never ever needed to talk about education. We never raised, like, you have a dinner or drinks with your friends, you never speak about education. It's kind of out of the formula. And the same thing with the health or many other things, or your pension thing. Like here, like in the US, the pension is a absolutely central thing that people kind of think about. Do I have enough pension to carry on when I stop working? And those things are so differently taken care of in the Nordic country. So I think that education. Yes, the education plays a very important part of this happiness thing, that when parents don't need to think about or pay for education, at least in Finland, I think that's a big deal in when parents are reporting, how they feel about life in general, when this education thing is kind of removed from their part of their concerns.
But that's about a kind of happiness, security and trust in the system. But actually in Sweden, I mean, the development the last 20 years and accelerating the last 10 years, education is a talk at dinner tables. What school have you chosen for your kid? There's a lot of anxiety among parents, about choosing the right schools and not choosing the bad ones. And opting for the good ones and stuff like that. So and that's something that I would like us, of course, to talk about. I mean, the differences now between Finland, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden, because Sweden has taken another route through the school system, through school reforms back in the 1990s that more and more are affecting society.
Yeah, but do you think that this fact that you mentioned about education being a topic in a family life and in the communities is linked to the kind of a sense of happiness that the Swedish people feel? In other words, would Sweden be on the top of the world in the happiness rankings? And all the Nordic countries are doing well. If you had an education system where Swedish parents wouldn't need to, worry about these questions of where do I find a good school, or
yeah, now you're asking me, but I would say that there is an anxiety among parents that is expressed through their relationships to schools, Swedish principles talks very much about the pressure from parents, the demands put on schools by parents, because the parents, they are more, more anxious because they also have an anxiety if they haven't made the right choice. It's now up to the parents. The quality of education lies now in the minds of the minds of the parents, because of the system.
Yeah, it's exactly the same thing here in Australia. That education is a marketplace, and you make a right choice, and you're satisfied and happy. You made a bad call and you're not. But then the government's response is to go shop around. If you're not happy, and this is what the minister said here some time ago. If you're not happy with the school where your children go, to shop around. They use the term shop around. Go and see what is around, and how much you can afford and spend on schooling. And it's exactly the same thing here. I find it personally as a parent here very disturbing and difficult to handle this. All these conversations about where's a good school, and what happens here is that when the school gets this reputation of parents trying to avoid the school, particularly high schools. There's some high schools in this neighborhood. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody, even they don't even go and see what the schools are doing, because the parents know that nobody wants to go there, and everybody takes their kids to some independent or Catholic schools where they parents think that they get better education.
Is this also a question of segregation in Australia, like it is in Sweden? Because that's what we see, that this system of shopping around mentality is actually increasing already segregated areas where people live. Since we also have had a lot of immigrants coming the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, that's true. Australia has according to the OECD, one of the most socially or socioeconomically segregated school systems in the world, much more than Sweden does, and that's one of these things that are very difficult to change when you have that type of social or socioeconomic segregation in the system. It's very, very difficult to change. So that's why if you can, kind of a policy advice is that if you can avoid that, try to do that as much as you can, because pulling these things back, as you can see in Sweden and many other countries, is a very complicated thing to do.
Yeah, but I had a talk a couple of years ago with the late Richard Elmore, because I guess knew him.
He was my colleague. Yeah.
He said he actually used the word he was scared, that he was most disappointed with in the interviews he had with Swedish parents when he was a part of the OECD Commission in 2015. It was the attitude from the parents that scared him the most, that there was an attitude now in Sweden that he hadn't met at any of his many visits to Sweden, where parents said that they were glad that they had a free school choice, because that made it possible for them to avoid certain kids. They actually spoke about and it's interesting because Australia was also one of the places where free school choice was first. The effects of free school choice was first really research, wasn't it? I mean, Fiske and Ladd and other early school choice researchers that saw these effects very early in Australia.
Yeah, there's a lot of research. I often say here that we don't need any more reviews of research. We know exactly, how this thing operates. That we need to just rely on facts, just like we have done during this pandemic thing. That's the kind of a hope that we have had here, is that education policymakers and leaders should behave and operate using the same logic that they have used with the health and medical experts during the last 2 years. Just look at the evidence. For example, this issue that you mentioned, that what do we know about the school choice and education as a marketplace? And this has been, as you said, a place where this has been much researched and investigated.
Can I go back like 10 years in time? because I think to me, and probably to many of my colleagues who have been working in the schools in Sweden for many years, we got to know you by the term germ, and I have it's a shortening of global educational reform movement, and as I believe I found out reading about you, it was introduced when you wrote an article in where was it? Washington Post in 2012. And you were talking about, and this is, well, we shouldn't laugh about the pandemic right now, but you were then talking about the germ as a virus infecting a system, spreading through people, borrowing ideas from other countries, and then politicians, taking them on. And I think I have two questions that might not be fully thought out yet. But first, do you ever get or feel despair? Because you've been talking, you were quite far ahead on this topic to many of us other people working in the school systems all over the world. And still 10 years later, we are still quite infected by the germ, because schools are marketplaces, definitely in Sweden. And the other question is, yeah, sure. Take it first.
Can I
Sure.
take this first, because it's a nice nice thing. I think the germ was the origin of the germ is interesting, because it's not fully my idea. I was working with people like Andy Hargreaves, and he has done a lot of work in Sweden as well. And we we spent a lot of time. This was when I was with the World Bank that time, and we tried to make a sense of what is happening in the world. Why some of the education policies and ideas are spreading so easily, and of course there are these agents that are carrying this virus more than others. Like World Bank is one of them, McKinsey, and the similar global international consulting firms that are easily taking these things from one place to another. And so we started to play with this metaphor of global education reform movement that behaved in many ways like a epidemics, or we didn't know too much about the pandemics, but the same way. I think yes, I've been trying to be patient with the fact that people have been aware of this germ, this education epidemic in many countries, but not much has happened. But there are also some examples like what happened during the last political elections, general elections in New Zealand, where they used this germ as a kind of a slogan for the education campaign. This is the first government, the first part of this government that is sitting there right now. So it's about 4 or 5 years ago. And many people they told me that this kind of a germ was so powerful and easy idea to explain to parents and even children that what is happening in our schools, that schools have been infected by these toxic ideas from overseas and systems that have been failing themselves. And so it was much easier for people to understand that if you try to explain somebody what's wrong with the accountability in the education system, or what's wrong with the standardized testing, or what's wrong with the competition, or seeing education system as a marketplace or corporate, it's much harder to convince somebody who has a particular mindset about. But this germ idea, this metaphor, has been so powerful thing, and then it has taken over in many other countries as well, and it's been used for the teacher union campaigns around the world. People speaking about the germ, and so I think that it has slowly done some good groundwork globally, and it may be that this kind of a germ, this global pandemic that we are living in now, will eventually give a little kick to this education epidemic idea as well. And this hope that I'm seeing within this germ idea or discourse in many countries is what I said earlier, that if we only could help policymakers and politicians and decision makers a little bit understand that education, just like health, people are saying that coping with this COVID thing cannot be politicized, that we cannot manage this thing through a political thing. Well, it's a question is how much it happens to be a kind of a political thing, that it has to be handled and managed so that we rely on evidence and the best available science that will help us to make better decisions. How often have we heard about these things in education? Not too much. When there's a new government coming in, almost in any country, like in Finland recently, they come with their own ideas and they give a damn about what the experts or evidence is saying, if this is something that took them to the office. So that's why I hope that this term will continue to be a kind of a live and dynamic idea for those who really want to, in their own systems, want to see that education systems, education policies would be treated in a similar way as we have been probably able to go through this pandemic thing with a relatively little damage. Of course, there has been a lot of bad things happening, but overall, that this could have been much worse if people had been, if the governments had been handling this COVID thing as they have been handling education. Hundreds of millions of people would have died. So it's only the thing that some sense has been there in these decisions and policies and regulations and these things that comes from real experts and research and the best available science, and that's where my hope with this germ thing is as well. What's your next one? You said that you have another.
Yeah, but I want to have a short one in the middle here.
Sure. Yeah.
Haven't you had I have a feeling that, for example, the World Bank and the OECD are much less germ infected, if we use that term now. They're not as enthusiastic or evangelical about market principles in education as they were 10 years ago, because it has obviously not worked the way people thought it should in many countries. At least that is an impression I get when I talk to people I talked to the ministry in Uruguay among people, and they say that there is another communication now about they are not so criticized in Uruguay about having strong teacher unions, for example, as they were 10 years ago.
Yeah, you are right with this one, but it also depends, and I'm saying this based on my experience. I spent 5 years as a staff member of the World Bank, and I know that it really depends on which country you talk to and which individual or what team was responsible for that. Mm-hmm. I know the people who work with the Uruguay, and it's a different thing. But then there are examples where, even now the World Bank has been imposing or requiring governments to, privatize education or higher education system just in the name of kind of an ideological thing, and it's often because of the individual people who are working there. I think that the both of these organizations that you mentioned, the OECD and the World Bank as well, that they have been thankfully learning from these past experiences, and there's a lot of smart people there, so they understand that just pushing and insisting agendas and ideas that simply don't work is a very silly thing to do, because you very quickly lose your stance. But they're still within the OECD and the World Bank, parts of the work that they do, or policies or strategies, something that goes very closely to this germ thing. And I think the important question, Per, is not only to look at what they do, what the World Bank is doing, but also ask what the World Bank is not doing. Yes. So what are some of those things that they don't kind of include in these education reforms and programs and policies that they finance or insist the governments to finance? Special education is one of those things. Human rights education is one of those things. It's still, I think the climate change, the environmental things is changing a little bit. At least the OECD is now stepping into this space, but the World Bank has a long time been kind of focusing on the traditional, conventional areas of schooling, regardless what the governments are asking or hoping to do. So, but I think you're right that things are probably getting a little bit better. Yeah.
So my
second question.
My second question. Well, because we were talking about what you actually been doing the last couple of years in Australia and what your focus is. So my question is actually because I'm desperately seeking for something that could actually cure this germ, the system that is so infected by the germ, and is the answer children's play, trust in teachers, equity on many different levels in the system? Is that a strong enough answer to vaccinate the system from the germ?
It's probably not strong enough, but it doesn't do any harm either. I think, I often say here in Australia that if we do not, if we adults and people like both of you and myself, if we are not able to change the education systems from what they are in many places, including Finland. Finland is part of this thing. Then the young people will take that when Greta Thunberg and her crowds around the world, when they have fixed this climate change thing. I don't know when it's going to happen, but education will be the next one that some students will take on, and so that's what is at stake. I think what we need to do, certainly here, I don't know exactly today what it is in Sweden, but probably the most important thing to start with this whole work here is to start with the communities and parents, and start with this basic conversation. What is the purpose of education? Why do we have schools? And what do we try to do with that? Because as long as people think, and this may be the case, kind of relevant for Sweden, that education is much more like an individual commodity. It's a kind of a private good that you get for your own kids, and when you have educated your own children, you're done. You don't need to worry about this anymore. Or is education something that is seen as a common public good that will, even if I don't have any children in the school system anymore, but my kind of a concerns about and help to make education systems better will help all of us. And that's something that's, for example, here in Australia, there's no kind of a clear answer to this question that what is the purpose of education? Why do we have education? Some people say that it's a public good, and some other people see that it's everybody's individual and private business. But any of these conversations and try to bring this vaccine to kill the germ will be kind of a short-lived if we don't have a common shared understanding of what education is all about. So play and trusting teachers, making schools more like a communities, they're all good things, and they can do some good things for individual children. But changing the system is a very different ball game, and that's where, like, again, how Australia is a completely different than Finland, for example. Is that when Finland the system changes, it changes because of the profession, because educators and teachers and principals, they use their voice and expertise to help the government and policymakers to understand what needs to be done next. Here, the teachers and the profession doesn't mean anything. Everything is about parents, and this is the first thing I learned from this minister I mentioned earlier. That he told me that remember that in Australia, we only change education policies and change education when the parents are asking us to do so. So that we give a damn about teachers and principals or the unions or the associations that we have plenty here. That doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that when parents come and say that, this is what we want, then everything changes. And that's a hugely different thing compared to the Scandinavian countries.
But you incorporate Sweden into that Scandinavian unity. I gave a talk a couple of years ago on this research ed, moment, Where I said that's we don't have that kind of a Scandinavian or Nordic model, because there's one country that's sticking out now. For an example, I mean, both the teacher unions in Sweden don't want this system the market system that we have. I mean, the school leaders union, they are not positive to it either. The pupil organizations are against it. We have a massive opinion against this kind of system that we are running, and nobody is listening to these voices. And what's interesting right now is that since a year or two now, teachers have been raising their voices much higher. The protests are higher. We have a fantastic school leader, for example, that has been reading all the 290 Swedish municipality school budgets, and she's doing this as a school leader on her free time, just to show to policymakers what's really going on, because nobody's really caring about all these voices. And we have a teacher corps we have only 70% now that is actually have a teacher degree that's teaching in Swedish schools. We have huge problems, and they are protesting, but actually businesses is going on as usual in the parliament. So I think there is a problem. But I would like just to ask that question as a Finnish person knowledgeable about education. What are your view on what happened in Sweden? How do people working in the in schools in Finland think about what's happened in Sweden?
Yeah, I think it's probably all goes back to the early 1990s, and I know this because I spent almost all 1990s in Finnish Skolverket, and we worked closely with the Skolverket in Stockholm. And I remember this early. I think it was a Carl Bildt who brought this voucher thing, and we had a lot of conversations in Finland as well. As you know, both of you know that Finland has pretty much copied the Swedish system in many ways since the 1960s. So many principles. Even the name of the grundskola is the same from Sweden. So we have been always looking at what the Sweden is doing. But something happened in the early 1990s, and Finland was actually very close to do exactly the same thing that Sweden was doing. But there was, there were enough people that time who were kind of asking questions, and our teaching profession was also, most of probably about half of the teachers had a master's degree, so a very different type of basic education that they were able to ask, like, so what is the evidence? So how do we know that the Swedish model is really, working for everyone? And just like your grundskola in Finland, the basic idea was to have a good education for each and every child. And so people were saying that this Swedish idea is probably not going to go very well. So the luxury that Finland has had is that we have been always coming a little bit few years behind Sweden in many innovations and experiments, including the school experiment. So, and this is my personal memory is that we had these meetings in Helsinki and said, let's see what happens in Sweden, because this sounds like a kind of a great simple idea, but does it really work? And it was very soon that colleagues in Sweden started to question and criticize this thing, and the first signs were showing that this is not probably the good idea. So I think that if you ask this question from Finnish educators, that they probably talk about the same thing, that there was a wrong turn in Sweden somewhere in early 1990s. The intention was good. I think all the credit should go to the kind of a brave experiments that Sweden has done, but in this case, it just happened to be a wrong one. As I have learned this in Sweden as well, and you guys, this better than I do, that when you kind of let this genie out of the bottle when it comes to market-based education and this parental choice and vouchers, it's very difficult to pull it back. and this is something that we understood in Finland, is that, this type of experiment, if it doesn't work, it's very difficult to pull it back and say, let's go where we started and, try something else. So I think that this thing that Sweden allowed the school system to, segregate through the parental choice and operate like a marketplace or using the market logic has led to many of those things that you know much better than I do, that have made Swedish education system difficult to run in a way that it would be equitable and higher quality than it should be right now. But that's I think there are individual things that I see more as a consequences of these decisions, like the thing that you mentioned, that it's difficult to get young people to choose teaching as a profession, or some other aspects in the school system that probably more are symptoms of this decision, bad choice in the 1990s.
Because what's happening now is, of course, a huge lack of trust. Because you have written about trust in teachers. There is now a lack of trust. We don't trust the organizers of education because they have profits as a motive. We don't trust teachers because grades is something that you use to compete with other schools. So we have national test systems, and the voices are there are all the time voices for more control, more tests, more independent tests, less and less trust in teachers, less and less trust in schools. Yeah. So the question is then, the big question is, of course, what would be your recommendation? How could we come back to a system with more trust? What would, if you were Anna Ekström and you had a parliament with the majority behind you, which she hasn't, it's impossible for her to do anything if she wanted. But if you had that, what would be your first reforms in Sweden?
Yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to reform. What I would do is I would seriously think about taking the teacher education reform even further. But it's difficult to do if you don't have students. You cannot. Yeah, it doesn't matter what your teacher education system is, how it's organized, if the young people don't see teaching as something that they would love to do. But I also think that without a competitive, high quality, different type of initial education of your teachers, it's difficult to bring back this trust. And this trust is a kind of a deadly spiral when you get into this, just like you described, that you are kind of creating new structures and new control elements that are kind of just eating away of this remaining trust that is there. So it's almost kind of inviting a overhaul of the whole system and redesigning the whole thing, which may be actually the necessary thing to do in a places like Sweden or some other place, maybe somewhere here, is that we cannot fix this thing anymore. That it's the only thing we can do is, and some of the OECD's scenarios for the future are this deschooling thing, that the public school systems basically collapse because they cannot operate anymore, and then something else comes in takes its place, and this may be this new system. But your question is great, but I don't have, if I had a good answer to Anna Ekström, I probably would have called her already and said that, how about trying something like this? But I think that if we could only find a way how to get more young people in here and many other countries to think about teaching as a interesting and rewarding profession, by providing them a challenging and curious academic training that would help them to do this job. That's something that it has to happen anyway. So that's probably something that I would put myself into and say that let's see how we can recreate this. Sweden has a lot of expertise and research and academic capital in your country when it comes to pedagogy and teacher education and educational psychology. There's a lot resources there to do, but how to turn this into something that the teaching profession would be seen in a different ways. But it's a really hard question. Same question, by the way, have been asked. People have often asked me and this minister who was a minister before. How do we change this thing here? We don't have it. Actually, I've been offering exactly the same answer here as well. That let's think about a new type of way to train and prepare our teachers so that it would attract more young people to do that.
I guess your latest book is a way to try to give support or an answer to that question. But I have an anecdote that I think is true, and I think that you have told, or somebody has told that you told it. It's about your own daughter, about the situation in Finland, about the it's not so easy to become a teacher in Finland, and that your daughter failed at her first attempt. Was that a true story, or is it something that I dreamt?
No, it's actually my sister's daughter, so it's my niece, and it's a 100% true story. It's a reported accurately in the Finnish Lessons, all the 3 editions of the Finnish Lessons. Yeah, that's what happened to her. That she was what we would say grade A student, the highest marks in a high school. Who was doing music and sports and everything. It's kind of an ideal young teacher, but she failed in the first go, and she failed because I've been sitting in these panels earlier in Finland, selecting this huge number of applicants, and then the very small number get through. And this killer question is that, why do you want to become teacher with all your grade A's and marks? Why not study business or medicine or law or something else? Because you could easily choose any of those things. And, she was not able to answer that question. She actually said that because my uncle is a teacher and my grandfather was a teacher and my mother is teaching as well. So
it didn't work.
Yeah, so she didn't kind of think about it. So next time she went to work in the school as an assistant teacher for a year and then applied again. And the same question came again. So why do you want to teach? Why do you think that this is your career? And she was able to talk about her experience and emotions and work with the kids and as part of the school, and that's it. Yeah, it's still the situation that when you go to a party where a lot of people are there and somebody introduces normally herself as a primary school teacher, everybody takes their hats off and say that that's a kind of a noble thing to do. And to be a primary school teacher in Finland means that you have to be actually pretty smart to do that. So it's not like in many other places that if you say that you're a primary school teacher, and the comment may be that so you didn't kind of find anything better to do in your life.
From a Swedish perspective, this is scarily inspiring. It's just so far away from our reality, and from most countries' realities, if we are true.
Yeah,
but it's just so fascinating. But it was the same. Anna Ekström, she couldn't become a teacher because she had she became a lawyer because she hadn't grades enough to become a teacher in Sweden in the 1970s. So.
Yeah, and that's what I tell people often when they ask about my, in the interviews like this. I say that I really wanted to become primary school teacher. I tried twice actually. I applied, but I was not good enough, smart enough to teach in a primary school. So I ended up teaching at Harvard and working with the World Bank, and doing all sorts of, advising Swedish government.
Yeah,
but I when I listen to you Per and Pasi in this discussion, I get a feeling that because you said, Pasi, that we have strong educators in Sweden, strong academic knowledge about teaching and learning and pedagogy, and maybe especially around these topics that you point out as important, the trust in the children's ability to learn, the trust in play as a way to learn, and things like that, and the democratic perspective on education. So it makes me think that I think we have in Sweden we have like an underlying power of strong teachers, strong educators, strong school leaders that are actually trying to do what they could do, but right now, despite the system, against the walls that the system put up. And you can only imagine what would happen if they could actually work helped by the system, supported by the system.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I've done a lot of work in Sweden and all the Nordic countries. So I think I have a good experience of those things, and I fully agree with you that there's a lot of potential. I remember sometimes some of the workshops or seminars I've done in Sweden. Sometimes I've felt like when I look at these people there that. Especially school principals, that they're almost like a beaten, that they feel like, there's nothing we can do. Everything has been taken away, and nobody trusts and supports, or nobody understands what we try to do, and that has been a huge difference to, I could work in a 1 week in Sweden. And Denmark is a little bit the same way, and then I come and do the same thing in Finland with the Finnish teachers or principals, and this empowerment, this energy that often, at least that time, was in among these Finnish educators is so different, because you could see that these people, Finnish principals, they knew that we are leading this thing. And we can make the change. And, if you complain about something that, this is bad, this doesn't work, the first response is that, why don't you go and change that? And whereas in places like Sweden, often you feel that, people's responses are, but, we cannot do anything because, this is what the system is doing, or this is what is required to do. And again, interesting, it's a little bit similar here. That we have excellent educators and teachers and principals here, but they often feel that they cannot do that, they cannot lead anything, they cannot, Australian teachers and principals cannot even publicly say what they think, and that's as long in Sweden as you can see teachers standing up and saying what they think about. That's a wonderful thing. But just think about the system where these voices have been muted as here. That no teacher can, without being afraid of being fired or punished, can stand up or give an interview to the radio or newspaper that journalists ask about, what's going on there, let alone that you write and publish something yourself. You just can't do this. So the value of having this teacher's voice is so important. You only realize it when it's gone and disappearing, and that's has happened here.
We have to let you go, Pasi. An hour has went very, very quickly.
Wow.
But I would like to ask a last question: is why education? Why are you engaged? Why is it? What's your inner motive for working with education?
Why I'm working in education?
Yeah.
I was born in a family of educators. Actually, I was born in a very remote northern village primary school in Finland. So what else can you expect? That's where I was raised, and I always felt since I was young that I want to work with the young people, and I want to do good things to the community, and that's what it's been. And I've been really blessed to be able to work in a different areas of education, not just I was teacher for a number of years and in the ministry for a number of years, but then also with the universities and international organizations. So it's been really my dream job in many ways, and given me so many opportunities. This education has taken me to White House meeting in Washington, D.C. The education has given me access to Sir Richard Branson's island, British Virgin Islands, twice, to hanging around with somebody like him. And I've met tens, hundreds of great education leaders around the world. And so it's been really, really something, a journey that I'm really happy and grateful for, every single moment. This question that you ask, I often reflect on some of the some of the young students here and some other universities when they asked, so what do you think? Should I go into teaching? I said, absolutely, you have to do that, because you never know where you will end up next. And because, if you take teaching seriously and do it through your heart, it's going to give you a lot of keys to many interesting things in your life that you have no idea about. Just like I said in the beginning, that I haven't really planned anything I've done in my life when it comes to work. Everything has just happened, and it has happened because of this education background that I have had.
I think that's a wonderful journey to envision from northern Finland to the British Virgin Islands. But also the beginning of the answer is because you wanted. Because it's an interesting job, because you do something for society. That's what nearly all teacher students answer. Why did you become a teacher? And it's a job that makes it possible for you to do something more than just to exist for your own good. There is a kind of a moralic. Yeah, it's a calling. Yeah,
it's a calling, and I think if I think through my work, I want to do everything I can to make sure that this world is I leave this world a little bit better than what it was when I arrived here. And of course, one individual cannot do that much, but if there's enough educators as we are, and if we all think like this, we can be sure that many things will be better, hopefully.
Yeah, and that's also why you can trust teachers, isn't it? Because
absolutely,
because that's the driving force.
That's the probably in the end, that's the only driving force that will be sustainable enough to give us a change that we need.
Thank you.
That's perfect.
Thank you very much, Pasi.
Perfect.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Ending to this conversation. Thank you so much for taking time to participate in our pod.
And we're a bit starstruck, but we will just thank you very much, and we wish you all the best and good luck with all the endeavors you do down there and all over the world.
Yeah, thank you so much, and sorry that I wouldn't be able to speak Swedish one day. One day I will.
Vi kan sluta på svenska, Pasi.
Ja, tack så mycket.
Ja, det är ingen fara. Jättebra. Tusen tack och hej då.
Hej då. Bye bye.
Hej då. Hej.
Ja. Ja. Lite starstruck och lite nervösa var vi, för det här kändes stort. Men,
men han är ju en sån superstar i de här sammanhangen.
Ja, verkligen. Och vilket fantastiskt samtal. Vad roligt det här var.
Och jag ska ju bara, det första jag ska göra sen när vi slutar prata är det att jag ska beställa den här sista boken, för den har jag inte läst.
Nej.
Som heter In Teachers We Trust. Men sen kan jag rekommendera alla, och jag kanske skulle vilja rekommendera något förlag. Jag tror inte att, eller jag är inte säker, men jag tror inte att den här finska Finnish Lessons finns översatt till svenska.
Nej, det är lite konstigt.
Det är en fantastisk jämförelse och en historisk beskrivning av det finska skolsystemets uppbyggnad, och han skriver också om dess likheter med det svenska. Även om han inte då berör vår situation, men just hur grundskolan då utvecklades efter svensk modell. Men de gjorde det lite bättre. Och det var det han var inne på slutet. För det de gjorde var att de insåg att de behövde ha ännu bättre utbildade låg- och mellanstadielärare. Så de skruvade upp så att de fick en längre utbildning än vad vi någonsin haft i Sverige.
Just det.
Och det var liksom en viktig kvalitetsmarkör som då har hjälpt dem då, precis som han beskrev i slutändan.
Och de var smarta nog då att låta Sverige gå ett par steg före och göra alla dumma misstag och så att de skulle slippa trilla ner i samma gropar. Det är ett smart sätt att tänka. När det i övrigt finns ganska mycket likheter mellan systemen och länderna och mentalitet och människor, så är ju det ett smart sätt att undvika de liksom värsta misstagen. Ja, det var liksom en mix av så här lite despair, liksom misströstan ibland, att det är fruktansvärt svårt att ändra på system när man väl har liksom satt dem i rörelse på något vis. Men också, tycker jag, mycket hopp i liksom att det är klart att det går.
Mm. Jag tror ju tyvärr att han har rätt, och det finns ju forskning på sånt. Alltså det finns en tysk som heter Markus Bosemeyer som har tittat på just system, om man väljer de här olika vägarna, att man inte kan gå tillbaka. Men då sa han ju att man kanske måste göra om det från grunden. Jag tror att det är, alltså man kan inte lappa laga för drivkrafterna i systemen. När man har valt vissa lösningar går de i den riktningen, och då kanske man behöver gå tillbaka till ritbordet och säga nej, men vi behöver göra ett rejält omtag. Men då måste man uppmana den politiska vilja och den politiska kraft som behövs till det. Och det är inga lätta saker.
Nej, men man har inte blivit minister för att göra lätta saker.
Är det så?
Tänker jag. Då har man väl verkligen kvalificerat sig för att göra svåra saker. Ja, nej, men, och jag vill också tipsa, om man inte nu kastar sig på att beställa Pasis senaste bok. Så jag har tittat ganska mycket på han har ju en webbsida. Där det finns både liksom andra poddar där man har varit med i, det finns en massa bloggtexter han skrivit som är liksom lagom med munsbitar att ta sig an, om man inte heller är så himla bekväm och läsa liksom engelsk vetenskaplig text. Så tycker jag att de är absolut liksom jätteintressanta och lättillgängliga.
Och då ska man säga att de här böckerna inte är vetenskapliga texter, utan de är i allra högsta grad populärvetenskapliga. Bara så att du inte skrämde bort någon, för att de är skrivna för en bredare publik. Ja. Jag vill bara säga något dumt, men de är skrivna så att alla kan läsa.
Ja, men så är det ju. Vi pratade om det där i något annat sammanhang när vi utvärderade lite grann här, att så här, du och jag har ju väldigt olika liksom vana att läsa vetenskaplig liksom litteratur och kanske läsa så här forskningsöversikter och sånt där. Du har ju det som en del i ditt jobb på ett sätt som jag som rektor och liksom i de roller jag har inte riktigt hittar tiden för. Men det finns ju väldigt mycket att ta till sig. Och det tänker jag är en av liksom Pasi Sahlbergs stora kvaliteter. Att de få gånger jag också har lyssnat på honom så är det... Han gör liksom komplexa sammanhang och väldigt väl beforskade sammanhang liksom lättillgängliga och lättbegripliga, även om man inte är inne i det där akademiska speciellt.
Ja, han är en duktig lärare.
Ja, men exakt, det börjar där.
Jaha, ska vi sätta stopp där?
Ja.
Och vara jätteglada för att vi fick ha det här samtalet med Pasi.
Verkligen. Och vi kan väl ändå få liksom så här göra en liten sån teaser att vi ska försöka liksom vara lite så här international någon gång ibland framöver. Vi har ju tidigare haft Diane Ravitch i en intervju som du gjorde med henne. Men vi kommer att ha fler internationella gäster framöver, vilket är jättespännande.
Sen får vi också vara lite stolta för att eftersom vi läste här nu, eller vi fick ett meddelande om att vi har haft minst 50 000 nedladdningar på podden. På 50, så det är häftigt.
Ja, tack till er som lyssnar.
Ja.
Det var roligt att ni gör det. Per sa innan vi drog igång den här utspelningen, när vi småpratade lite med Pasi, att åtminstone från början och fortfarande så är ju det en bonus på något vis för oss, därför att vi gör det här helt frivilligt för att vi tycker att det är så himla kul. Och sen att ni som lyssnar också tycker att det är kul och intressant, det är ju verkligen en fantastisk bonus. Och vi blir tillsammans faktiskt en maktfaktor i diskussionen om den svenska skolan. Det ska vi inte glömma. Och det ska vi vårda ömt och med stor respekt.
Ja, och vi blir lite klokare för varje samtal.
Verkligen.
Och du har just lyssnat på ett avsnitt av Kornhall Netz. Och det är en skolpodd som jag, Per Kornhall och Ingela Netz, vi gör i samarbete med tankesmedjan Arena Idé. Och vi gör det alltså helt ideellt. Vi tjänar inte en krona på detta. Men i varje avsnitt så har vi möjligheten att intervjua en eller flera personer vars kunskaper, position eller arbete gör dem intressanta för den svenska skolan, skoldebatten. Om du har någon som du tycker vi ska prata med eller det finns frågor du vill att vi ska belysa, så hör av dig till oss. Du hittar kontaktuppgifter där du hittar podden Och vi påminner igen om att vill man inte bara höra oss utan också titta på oss, så finns de möjligheterna också via Harjana Hides hemsida eller Facebook-sida och så vidare med mera. Med det så säger vi tack för idag. Hej då!
Tack, hej då!